Have you ever finished a drawing and when you're looking at it at the end, something's just not quite right, something's missing? Even though it may be technically correct, everything's in its right place, but somehow, some way, it just doesn't look like it's pulled together. Either it looks too flat, or the features look a little disconnected, or just somehow it just doesn't look alive. Today, I'm going to share with you a technique that can truly transform your drawings, and it's called big form modeling. Big form modeling is the art of creating volume and a sense of form in the early stages of your drawing. It's about creating the soft flowing transitions from your lights into your shadows within the larger shapes of whatever it is that you're drawing that gives it a sense of form and three-dimensionality and a cohesiveness. And that's before you even start doing any of your details, particularly if you're working from photographic reference, so that your work doesn't end up looking flat and photographic. Instead, your work will gain a sense of natural depth, which will help it look like it's coming right off the page. By focusing on the big form and the larger shapes into your shadows, you're laying the groundwork for a cohesive and lifelike drawing. In this tutorial, I'm going to guide you through the basics of big form modeling step by step. Together, we'll build confidence in your approach to shading and form, and you'll see how that one small trick can make a world of difference in your drawings. This tutorial is part of a full course that I offer on my Patreon site called Draw a Portrait from Your Own Photo. So now that I've taken the time to go and fix those little problems, we're going to go into the next principle, which is called big form modeling. And what form is, when we talk about that, what we mean is creating something so that it looks like it actually sort of coming off the page. It's rounded, it has volume to it. So what big form refers to is exactly just that. What it means is the larger forms within the context of a more complex image. So when we're talking about it in the context of the head, when we look at the large form, we're looking at generally the whole head, as in like the egg of the head, rather than all the smaller forms that we have here, which are like the nose, the mouth, the cheeks, the chin, the area around the eyes. Like there's lots of smaller little lumps and bumps and forms all over that larger form that it sits on. So when we're talking about the large form, what we're talking about is dealing with the larger extent of it as a whole. And when we're in figurative drawing, what we're referring to is like the whole of the head, or the barrel of the torso, or the cylinder of the neck, or the arms, or the legs. And we deal with those larger forms first, and then we get into the smaller forms on top of that. And what this does actually is unify the whole image before we start putting all these smaller forms on top of it. And it makes a huge difference actually. It pulls the image together in the foundational level so that when you start putting smaller forms on top of it, it has this kind of, it looks like it's cohesive, it looks like it's all put together, as opposed to going in right away and working with these smaller forms. And what ends up happening is that they look kind of disjointed and patchy and lumpy. Putting in the larger form lays a solid underlying value for you to build upon, which unifies the entire picture. And it makes a huge difference actually. This is what we're going to do now. We're still in this foundational stage, and we're going to put in the big form modeling. So what am I going to do? I'm going to look at the head as a whole. And when I look at that, I see that there's light coming in from the left side. It's coming in here, and then it spills and wraps around her face this way towards the right. And it's the brightest over here, which is why we put the white in. And then gradually it diminishes as we go across the side of the face. And even here on the hands, where there's highlights there, those highlights are not the same as these highlights here. And so when I'm looking at this particular piece of reference material, when I squint and look at the values that are across the right-hand side of the face, I can see that even on the highlight of the cheek over here, it's still at least one value darker than even over here. So I'm going to gauge, and this is why we needed our lights and our darks, exactly what that value is. And I also have to take into account the paper as well. So I'm looking at that, and I believe that this area here is about a 30% value. The paper is about a 20% value, but even there in the lightest, it's about a 30% value. And then it gradates across the forehead, of course, and then across this cheek and somewhere around the chin as well. And that's the area that I'm going to work with my big form. And how I'm going to do that is I've got my HB pencil here. I've sharpened it really nice and sharp. I've got my pencil extender, and this is actually really important because I want to deal with this with an extremely light touch. And I'm going to create a gradient going across this whole side of my face in a very soft, sweeping idea of moving across the form, so that if you think of a ball or an egg and you see the way that the light will spill over gradually on that kind of an object, this is what we're going to be doing with the form of this head. But I want to make sure that it's very soft and it comes over very gradually, and I want to make sure that I hit the right value as well. So what I'm going to do to start, I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to move it across this area. I'm going to look how far that I want it to go. So I'm looking at my values here, and I see that it goes to about a 30% value, maybe about an inch off of here. And then it comes down to about a 20% value here in the lighter spot. And this, even in its lightest spot, is still about a 30. And that also includes the eye as well. There's no white of the eye. The white of the eye is not white. So I realize, and then about here, it goes for about an inch as well. So I want to create a gradient that's going to go across that whole area in here. And I need to do it very, very lightly and very, very carefully. So I'm going to take my pencil, I'm holding it way back. I'm resting my hand on my paper here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a little bit back beyond this terminator line that goes along here. And I'm going to start flicking my pencil lightly across the paper. And when I say lightly, I mean very lightly. And I'm going to create a gradient. And what I do with that is that I put the pencil on the paper, and then I just very lightly flick it with my wrist. But what I'm doing is I don't go back and forth. I'm not scrubbing it back and forth. I want this gradient to sort of fade right off. So I'm hitting here, and then I go up, and then I loop. I lift my pencil up, and then I loop it back and come back and hit again. And the way I describe that with my students is I say, you know, the airplane lands, it takes off. The airplane lands, it takes off. The airplane lands, it takes off. Okay, so I'm just going to begin that process. And I want to go carefully, steadily across, having that gradient go out maybe about an inch. And I'm being careful because down here it starts getting lighter. If by mistake I end up with too strong a line, like I put a scratchy kind of streak across there, I can go back in with my eraser and just lightly lift it off. Now I'm going to go back in there and just start putting this on gently, layer upon layer. And that's how I can control how dark it goes without getting right out of hand. And I'm going to also, in order to prevent any streaks, which will inevitably show up, I'm going to switch direction, just like I did when I was doing laying my flat even tone. And I'm going to start up here, and I'll do exactly the same thing. And I'll just go in the opposite direction, and I build it up. So you'll see that I'm building this up very slowly, very carefully, moving in the different directions. We can also go back in with our blending brush as well, and to help that process. You'll notice what I'm doing. I'm using my brush exactly the same way that I was using my pencil. And I'm doing the same thing. I put my brush down, I pull it over, I lift it up, loop it back, and I'm very soft and I'm very gentle with it. And I don't scrub back and forth. Do not scrub back and forth with your brushes. You will wreck your drawing, and you'll make this big smoky patch that you're going to have one heck of a time trying to fix. And I'm also cognizant of my shadow shape there. I don't want to lose it. So I can go back in and reinforce my dark in here, because I know that's going to get a lot darker. I don't want to go too dark and overshoot my value on this paper. I have to look and see where does it, the point hit where the value on my drawing is the value of the paper, and I don't want to put too much pencil on top of it. Then I'm going to move down into here, into the bottom part on the cheek, and do the same thing. Now this, I can go right over the eye, because I can see that the eye is not white. So I'm just going to move across that whole area and start to build it up. So, and as I'm moving along here and across the whole sort of volume of this face, I'm careful to sort of think about what's going on in my mind. I don't see myself working across a flat surface of a piece of paper. In my mind, it's as if I have a sculpture in front of me and it has form, and I'm moving across that form as if I am moving up and around and over. I'm creating that form in my mind, and it's as if I have this ball in front of me and I'm working my way around this ball in order to create the form. And I know that sounds maybe a little kind of, I don't know, different, but the reality is that what our intention is what we are going to create. And if in our mind we are working on form, we will create that form. If we're working on a flat surface and we see it as flat, it'll look flat. So it's really important to have your focus on what it is that you're trying to create. So I always think when I'm creating form of any kind, larger forms or the smaller forms, when I get into them, I imagine myself moving across that three-dimensional form in a very three-dimensional way. It's as if I'm pulling my pencil around a ball. So I'm working it this way. And then I'm going to go across there. I'm actually going to go right over the eye and work my way up that whole area. And you'll notice I'm just doing it carefully, layer upon layer, so that I can gauge my values up very carefully. And if I want to know if it's getting too dark too soon, or if I need to keep going, the only way that you could really effectively see your values is to squint. What that does is it gets rid of all the little distracting details and allows us to really zero in on basically the value that we're looking at. And so right now I'm looking at this patch right here in relationship to my reference piece, and this can definitely go darker. The whole thing can go darker, but right now as I'm building the form, I'm squinting almost the entire time I'm doing this. I'm going to keep going with my brush. I know this will end up getting darker later on. I can tell just looking back and forth, but I'm going to have to work up some of these first. But I want to lay this base tone down before I do anything, which is essentially what this whole big form modeling is. If I didn't lay this base tone down, this gradient underneath, when I would go back in and start working with these smaller forms underneath, it would come out looking lumpy and patchy. It just wouldn't hold together the same way. By laying that gradient in on the right side of the face, it does two things. It gives the illusion of form in the cheek and the head, but it also makes that side of the face look like it's in shadow and recede backward. If I have that lighter patch on the cheek, it pushes that whole cheek forward too much and flattens the whole drawing out. So this whole process of big form creates this sense of form, the sense of roundness, and the sense of the image sort of coming off the page and looking more realistic. So remember, if you're working from photographic reference, adding this element of big form, even if you don't see it in the actual photograph, but arbitrarily putting it in, can make all the difference from your work looking flat and photographic to having a remarkable likeness. And if you would like to develop the skills to create beautiful and realistic portraits, you can. Simply go to the Patreon link at the end of this video and find out how. So before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the challenges that you've had when working on your own artwork in order to make it look realistic and not look like you just simply copied a photograph? So drop a comment below and let's chat. And if you're interested in more art tips and inspiration, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more transformational art videos coming your way. Thank you for joining me on this artistic journey. And until the next time, stay creative. This is your time to express yourself. Happy drawing, and we'll see you in the next video.